We saw a little earlier how Bobby Fischer was able to use the King's Indian attack very successfully in his game against Miag Murison. He also used the same motifs with the black pieces. So I don't think it's out of place, despite the fact I'm recommending the King's Indian attack for white, to see a splendid Fischer performance as black in the King's Indian attack. Because the way he plays it, to a degree, mirrors our approach with white. And I think you should imagine in this game, playing white is Emil Nikolic, playing black Bobby Fischer, played in Vinkovci in 1968. You can imagine that the same motifs are applying in this game as to, for instance, white playing 1e4, black playing c5 in the Sicilian. It's just a reverse King's Indian attack against a Sicilian defence. As it turns out, Bobby Fischer manages to prove that the extra tempo that white has in these positions doesn't make a great deal of difference. Now the first difference is felt here in that black has not yet developed his knight on b8. So I suppose if white wanted to, he could take on e5 in this position and then take on d8. This of course is a very toothless approach, and especially so here, with the diagonal of the bishop on g2 blunted by the pawn on c6, and no real opportunity for white to get anything other than a draw from this position. I mean, I suppose the best move here really is something like rook d1. But you know, black can play on here, and I'm sure that Fischer would have done with something like rook takes d1 and then bishop e6. Okay, you know, if as black the opponent does something like this, you can't do very much about it. But in general, most players are up for a fight with the white pieces, as they should be. And in this particular game, Nikolic just played rook b1. So with hindsight, we know this is a wasted move in many ways. It's similar to Allman's rook b8 in the last game. White should simply content himself with getting on with the queenside attack with moves like b4. Rook b1 doesn't really have much part to play in the coming moves. Fischer played e4, b4, and now bishop f5. So you can see the similarities with the King's Indian attack. And they continue as white plays h3 and black plays h5. Black, well, if you imagine white would normally play h4 anyway, but in this case black plays h5 specifically to stop white from playing g4 and then knight g3, ganging up on the pawn at e4. White played knight f4 and black played knight bd7. So this is a very similar type of position to the one we're angling for as white. And black's intentions are twofold. Number one, he's aiming to get a kingside attack, and number two, he's aiming to defend himself successfully against white's projected attack on the queen side. Fischer dropped his knight back to f8. You can see how similar this must be. c5, d5. Now, I'm absolutely convinced that c5 was a mistake, because once again, white is blocking the queen side. We've seen the perils of this from black's perspective in the preceding games. Now we see white making the same error here. Yes, Nikolic thinks, okay, I can press forward with b5, but taking all the tension out of the central pawn structure makes black's centre rock solid and much easier for him to manage the kingside attack, because white doesn't really have much counterplay. I mean, okay, he takes on c6, but how easy is it for white to get after that pawn? Now that he's played a4, he can't even play queen a4 to follow up. So just dropping back to the position after knight f8, I do feel that white would have had better chances for success if he pressed forward with b5 and then just continued, or even maybe a5, and just continued to try and create some pressure on the queen side by these means. However, Nikolic played c5, d5, b5, and now knight 8 to h7. So the knight is heading for g5, I think, to cause white fresh problems. Well, bishop d2 is symptomatic of white's difficulties here. White has no really active plan. He can pretend he's doing something on the queen side, but what does it actually amount to? Meanwhile, black manoeuvres his pieces into better positions and starts to put the heat on. Rook comes to b2, queen comes up to d7, and now white has to think about the pawn on h3. He certainly doesn't want to play h4 in this position. Black would be delighted with that, because that will give him the opportunity a bit later to either think about g5 or maybe to even sacrifice a piece on h4. So Nikolic plays the less committal move, king h2, and we can't blame him for doing that. And now comes a very good move indeed, bishop h6. Two ideas behind this key move. Point number one, at some stage black may be thinking of taking off that knight with the bishop. That will remove a key defender of the white king. Okay, he's got to move his knight on g5 out of the way first, but that's certainly very much on black's mind. The second idea, and I think this is the more important one, black is planning king g7 and then rook h8. King up, rook across. I think that's the primary idea behind bishop h6. Well, white plays a5, again pretending he's doing something, and now comes a splendid move by Fischer, bishop g4. A thematic sacrifice once again, and I'm sure this was a move Nikolic overlooked. Probably white's got to take that piece in view of the big weakness here on f3. So h takes g4, h takes g4. Now the idea of king g7 and rook h8 becomes very appropriate, as does knight f3 check. White went rook h1, black put the knight in on f3. Of course white has to take that, and now black takes back with the g pawn. Well, this is really problematic for white now. He cannot shunt his pieces across to the king side to help his king. It's noticeable that the queenside pieces once again are completely almost move bound in this position and helpless to prevent black's coming attack. Well, white played king g1, and now black played it very simply. He took on f4. Obviously black is threatening queen g4 if he takes with the g pawn, so he must take with the e pawn. King g7, f5, rook h8. Key idea of attacking play is not to waste any time. Black's idea here is just to strip out the defenders of white's king and then go in with queen h3 and then queen g2 mate. What really can white do here? Black simply threatening a slow motion mate, starting with queen takes f5. Nikolic decided to jettison a piece with bishop h6 check. Now let's just take a look at the alternative here. Rook takes h8. Okay, black recaptures, rook takes h8. And now what is white to do? I mean, he really is in a hopeless situation. If he tries queen f1, we go queen takes f5. And now black is threatening queen h5. Going back to rook takes h8, rook takes h8. There's no escape for the white king here with king f1, rook h1 is mate. And so I think we can conclude that basically white is lost. Bishop h6 tries to clear the decks at the cost of a piece, and well, a feeble attempt to get the queen in really with queen d2, but Fischer just simply plays g5. B takes c6 was answered by queen takes f5. Very well calculated by black, as in the Murison game. The attacker just jettisons the queen side. He knows he's putting the boot in there against the white king. Last throw of the dice here. Knight comes to e3 to defend against the mate. And now king g6. I suppose black can also play knight g4 in this position. That's also very, very strong. But king g6 will do the job, threatening rook h8. White resigned. So a game with black perhaps, but a very typical King's Indian attack, and very well played by Bobby Fischer. I suppose the key move there was bishop g4, sacrificing that piece. Let's go back to that moment. Well, you're going to encounter very similar motifs when you play 1e4 and black plays c5, and you get to your King's Indian attack position. More of that a little later.